Hello there. Whoa, okay. Hello? Oh, that is now actually working, so I don't need to use my big voice. Hello, welcome to Conway Hall and the London Fortean Society. If you've not been with us before, welcome. Essentially, you've probably seen from the previous, the slides that are still going, the London Fortean Society is here to just have open-minded, fun talks about various open-minded and fun things like ghosts, UFOs, conspiracy theories, and witchcraft. Just, regular day-to-day stuff. So if you've not been with us before, welcome. I overheard one person say, what does Fortean mean? We essentially follow the works of the writer Charles Fort, American writer who lived in London for a short while, who kind of had a way of looking at science and belief in a way that questioned everything. And how we interpret that is we put on speakers who we think are good and have got something interesting to say, and you can make up your own mind about them afterwards. So how the evening is going to go is Thomas is going to come on in a moment and give a talk. He'll speak for about 45 minutes to an hour. We will take a comfort break. His book is available from the back, from the Word Bookshop. We'll come back for a question and answer session. Words about that when we're there. And then at the end, we'll have a book signing session for those of you who have bought or brought books. And then we go to the pub because basically it's been an emotional evening. So do please welcome one of the nicest and hardest working people in occultism currently. Occultism is such a broad church that if your own particular path or way is not mentioned, please don't be upset. I'm sure you could bring up in the Q&A. But otherwise, speaking on Cursed Britain, modern witchcraft and black magic, do please welcome Thomas Walters.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming out. We should have done this on Halloween, really. Did you hear the one about the magician that lived in the desert? They called her a sandwich. It's all right, it gets better. You hear the one about the magician that was responsible for the illuminations at Halloween? They called her a light switch. Okay, I promise, only one more. And if you get this one, you get an official certificate of effort from Hogwarts. Why do the witches always lose at baseball? Because their bats fly off. Okay, right. Thank you, London. I believe we've got time for questions now. Okay, going to be serious now. I've got a few prepared remarks and then I'm going to wing it. I want to start by drawing your attention to something that's weird, something that's spooky, something that some people might say is scary. And that's the number of our fellow humans, the proportion of us, who believe our world is inhabited by mystical, occult forces. I'm not talking about gods. I don't mean religion. I'm referring to the esoteric, the Fortean, or, in a word, magic. It's a massively controversial and I think an enormously misunderstood topic. For example, you often hear it said that education, secondary schooling, university, stunts or eradicates belief in magic. But how do you square that claim with the fact that luck and fortune-telling is very widely believed in, for example, amongst the very well-educated populations of East Asia, amongst people from South Korea and Taiwan, for instance? if the polls are to be believed, about half of school graduates and university graduates from sub-Saharan Africa believe in witchcraft. That includes scientists, medics, government ministers, members of university faculties. Magic's an incredibly ancient thing. It's found in pretty much every society throughout the world and every society throughout history. Presumably it emerged in the mists of prehistory. And here's a thought. Perhaps we've even evolved to, if not believe in it, then to kind of understand it, to recognize its basic ideas. Sort of understand it intuitively. If so, that would help to explain why today desperate and distressed people feel quite able to move between a succession of magical or spiritual healers without having a real background in the particular tradition in question. Magic's deep roots in our psychology may also help to explain another striking fact. And to put it bluntly, today, billions of us, we've got, 6.7 billion, is it? 7.7 billion on the planet? Billions of us believe in magic, billions in ghosts, billions in fortune telling, billions in mystical healing. And I think most of us, or most widely believed in, is, we're kind of prepared to credit or at least act as if there was such a thing called luck. And here's where it starts to get controversial. I don't think magic, is all bad. Lucky charms, lucky amulets have given courage and inspiration to fighters throughout the ages, from the Haitian Revolution to the First World War. The use of amulets was basically universal in the First World War. There's a wonderful book called The Supernatural War by Owen Davies about that topic. To independence struggles in Africa. Elite athletes seem also to get a kind of presence of mind and a kind of comfort from lucky rituals. Some people find spiritual healing calming, soothing, psychologically therapeutic, I suppose. Above all, magical stories are, enchanting, poetic, gripping. Some of our best stories are concerned with magic. But just because magic's not all bad doesn't mean it's all good. Magic can be fraudulent, it can be misleading, and it can be seriously destructive, and I think we need to be honest about that. People can get addicted to fortune telling, or people can get beguiled by strange conspiracy theories about occult societies or shape-shifting lizard humanoids. Tonight, I'm going to talk about one of the most powerful and potentially dangerous types of magic: witchcraft. I'm not talking about Harry Potter, obviously. And I don't really mean witchcraft as a spirituality, Wicca, hedge witchcraft, and other varieties of witchcraft as a spirituality that have emerged mostly in the Anglosphere in the last 80 years. Now, the type of witchcraft I want to talk about tonight is the dark type of witchcraft. Curses, hexes, evil eye, ill-wishing, occult attacks on other people, mystic interpersonal harm. Basically, the idea that behind our troubles, seemingly ordinary troubles, might lie a spell. You might think with that kind of witchcraft that it belongs in the pre-modern world. When you think about the dark type of witchcraft, you might imagine Europe in the period of the religious wars, the Witchfinder General, the Reformation. But if you do think that, it's wrong. witchcraft, the dark type of witchcraft, is basically it's a human universal. It's been found and recorded throughout history across the world. There's records of it, of maleficent magic in ancient Egypt, references to it in ancient Greece, in ancient Rome. And it's a desperately serious problem today. The idea of evil magic inspires, frankly, oceans of human rights abuses around the world, attacks on people who are accused of witchcraft. The statistics are kind of dubious, they're sort of estimates. Some anthropologists reject them altogether, but I think that's going a bit far. But to give you an indication of the scale of this problem, the United Nations did a report into vigilante attacks on alleged witches in India over 16 years, between 1987 and 2003. And what they concluded was that 25,000 people had been killed after being labelled witches. And if you think that's bad, consider the phenomena of child witchcraft. The idea that children can be possessed or that they can be witches and the kind of evil can go out from them and harm their families. That's an idea that seems to have originated in sub-Saharan Africa in the second half of the 20th century and sort of spread around the world with the African diaspora. But witchcraft, the idea of witchcraft, it's not just current and it's not just a problem in the global south. It's here today hopefully not right here, but in Britain, in Europe, in the Western world. And that's been the subject that, for good or ill, I've been researching for the last 15 years. Yep, 15 years. You know, I was telling my family and friends all this time I was writing a book. I think they thought I was a fantasist. They thought it would never be done. I must admit, I kind of thought it would never be done. But I've written this book, Cursed Britain, A History of Witchcraft and Black Magic in Modern Times. And it's about the currency of witchcraft, belief in witchcraft, in Britain from the early 1800s to the present day. And if it's a subject you've not looked at before, I think you'd be amazed at the extent of belief in dark forces, especially in the 1800s. The kind of intricate folk magic that you could find across Britain from cursing wells or villages that had particular reputations as places where many witches lived. I think you'd probably be shocked at the number of people, the thousands of people in Victorian Britain who made their livings partly out of providing cures for witchcraft and for black magic. And I think you'd probably be horrified at the scale of vigilante violence against supposed alleged witches in the Victorian period. Think of it as a kind of very prim and staid and buttoned up era, but you get a very different perspective on British history when you start looking at the history of this sort of magic. Now, I think I can imagine what some of you are thinking. Did they really do it? Were there really witches? Whether or not, you think that magic actually works. Did some people actually attempt to do evil with magic? Well, to put it bluntly, yes, some people did. There's a historian, archaeologist called Brian Hoggard that drew my attention to this. This is a figurine, an effigy, that's in the Hereford Museum. It's from Herefordshire. It was found and made in the later 19th century. And it's a particularly dark and scary effigy that was used to try and really harm somebody. You'll notice it's wearing a dress, maybe a dress out of that victim's fabric. Eagle-eyed viewers amongst you may see it's got hair. It's got plaits, it's got ponytails, string and silk hair. It's got a painted face. And wrapped up with that effigy was a curse. And I'm going to, I hope you're not too nervous. I'm going to read this out now to give you a sense of what people said. Mary Ann, I act this spell upon you from my whole heart, wishing you to never rest, nor eat, nor sleep, the rest apart of your life. I hope your flesh will waste away, and I hope you will never spend another penny I ought to have. It was an inheritance dispute, wasn't it? Yeah. Could be useful. Wishing this from my whole heart. That's a kind of pretty common formula, really. You could buy, in the Victorian period, you could buy little fortune-telling books that would tell you how to do all sorts of magic. They didn't normally have details about how to harm someone, but they tell you how to do things like love magic to try and change someone's heart and, bring their affections towards you. So yeah, people did try and do dark magic with witchcraft, but only a very small number of people. And most of the people, the overwhelming majority of people that were accused of witchcraft, there's no evidence whatsoever that they did any of the dark things they were accused of. Instead, witchcraft's something that I think begins with the victims. And I want to try and talk about the mindset that's behind this whole belief system now. It's when terrible things happen, when you get ill, when you lose your job, when you fall out with your partner, you have problems at work, when your animals die, and you try the normal solutions. You go to the doctors, you go to the vet, you try harder at work, you try to get a new job, you're nicer to your partner, but it doesn't work. And in those circumstances, desperate people can start to think differently. Desperate people can start to credit things that they'd previously dismissed. So maybe you're thinking, you could never believe in witchcraft. Nonsense, fantasy, ridiculous. Well, if you do, you're in good company, because that's what most of the people that I write about in my book, that's what they thought as well. And I want to tell you a true story now. It's a story going back to early 1800s Britain, first decade of the 19th century. Think the era of Jane Austen. It's set in Dorset, down on the south coast, in a little village, more like hamlet really, called Turner's Puddle, or Toner's Puddle. And there was a guy that lived there, he was a clergyman in fact, called William Ettrick. He was a very clever man. He'd been to grammar school in York, he'd been to Oxford University, he was actually a fellow of an Oxford college. He was quite a rich and successful man. He was heir to some great estates up near Sunderland that had been, passed through this gentry family for generations. He's a published author, and as I said, he was a clergyman in the Church of England. And he was a man that didn't believe in witchcraft either. He moved to the village, he moved to Turner's Puddle in 1804 with his wife and with his kids. And he needed to hire some servants to help him look after his estate, to clean the house and to sort of farm in the garden and look after the children. And one of the servants that he interviewed was a local lady, a middle-aged lady called Susan Woodford. And she had a bit of a sharp tongue, but she was a really good worker. But before William Ettrick could hire her, his parishioners, they warned him. They said, "Reverend, things happen to people who cross Susan Woodford. Accidents happen to them. Terrible things happen to them that earn her displeasure. She's a witch." Now, William Ettrick thought that was absolute nonsense. He thought it was risible, ridiculous. This is just credulous, superstitious peasants, right? Who could believe something like that in the early 1800s? So he hired her. And then things started to go wrong. His horse fell ill. He called in the farrier, which is, kind of like the expert with horses. Paid him some money, but it didn't work. The animal died. Then his crops started to rot. And then, worst of all, his little son fell ill. And he thought the little infant was going to die, in fact. And it seemed to William that when Susan came near his little son, he kind of withdrew, like he could kind of feel the malice. And he started to look through his diary and review these troubles. And this is why I can tell you the story. Witchcraft's a very hard subject to study because people don't really like talking about it. They don't really like being frank about it. The sources are very hard to come by. But in this case, William had documented everything very carefully and intricately in his diary. He reviewed his diary, and what he worked out, what he saw, was that wherever there was a misfortune, wherever there was a trouble, Susan Woodford was there. And then he remembered. She'd asked him for a hair from his horse's tail. Strange thing to do. Actually, that was a piece of folk magic. It was supposed to get rid of warts. One to try, possibly. There are all these sort of gruesome methods for getting rid of warts, sort of rub a slug or a snail on your wart and then impale it on a pin or, this kind of thing. Rub peas on it and then leave it on the wall for someone else to touch and then it gets transferred. And this was another method, was, the good old medicine of the early 19th century. This was just another, no doubt, a folk cure to get rid of Susan's warts. But in his desperate state, in his disorientated state, the Reverend Ettrick, he thought that Susan Woodford had been using the hair as the ingredients in a spell. Ultimately, he put his immense learning to good use. He wrote out bits of the Bible in Hebrew, and he kind of tied them around the neck of his little son, and it was supposed to, kind of shield him and protect him. But even that wasn't enough. In the end, this guy, this really wealthy guy, this really sort of powerful guy, well-educated guy, the thought of being bewitched, it actually drove him away from Dorset. He left the village, he gave up his job, and he moved back north. He moved back to Sunderland. But imagine you were in his position. Imagine that you'd started to credit things, to believe things that you'd previously thought impossible. What would you have done? Well, being a kind of pillar, an upstanding pillar of the community, it was quite limited what this clergyman could do. But in the 19th century, there was a sort of vast folk magic, an enormous array of cures and solutions for people who thought they were bewitched. And I want to draw your attention to some of those now. This was one of the most common. Sorry for the black and white, or should I say blue and white photo. This is two pieces of mountain ash, and they're tied together with some red thread there. It's the kind of thing that people used a lot in Scotland, that they put up around the houses. You could kind of go to specialists and buy this kind of thing. Alternatively, if you wanted to protect your buildings in a bit more intricate way, you could use ritual markings, things like this. Now, can you make these out? They're called these either daisy wheels or hexafoils. It's a circle, and then it's got 6 little ellipses inside. I found these in a barn in Derbyshire, as you do. So you want to protect your building, you can make, and people did, people made marks like this. It's a very ancient symbol, goes back to the ancient world, and it was used throughout the medieval period and well into the 19th century and beyond. So, if you've not heard about this stuff, there's this kind of really rich tradition of folk magic that not really spoken about, not really documented, but was a big part of the social history of the period. So you've got your rowan tree, the fancy word for these, apotropaic markings. Apotropaic, from the Greek, it means evil repelling. Here's one, bit of a better definition there. Or you could start to get really serious. If you really wanted to get your own back on a witch, you could try and attack her back with magic. Something like this. You could get instructions for this kind of thing. Go to fairs in Victorian England and go and visit some dodgy character, and he'd sell you a little instruction on how to send the magic back. And that's an animal heart there with some pins made very carefully, very intricately from thorn from a tree. So you felt you were bewitched. You've tried putting up these apotropaic markings. You've tried attacking your witch back. Maybe you were even wearing some amulets. You could get things called luck and booth brooches. They were like a little heart with a pin through. They were quite popular in Scotland. They were believed to sort of be able to shield people's bodies from witches and other malevolent creatures like fairies, the good people, I should say. But imagine you tried that, and imagine it didn't work. Well, in that case, you're going to need expert help. You're going to need to go and see somebody like this. The conjurer will see you now. This is a Georgian satire. This was drawn and painted right at the start of the 19th century, in the early 1800s. You don't normally think of Georgian satires as depicting magic. You think about them being political and being about, corpulent royals and horrible politicians, and maybe the unruly masses. But there were a few about witchcraft and magic. And what's going on here? This is a satire on a visit to a magician. They're sometimes called cunning folk, wise people. In Cornwall, they were called pellers. The word peller, it probably derived from repeller, and sort of repelling evil. And here's the guy, here's the magician, here's his client in pink, and the magician's servants pickpocketing the client. If you're wondering what this is supposed to be the devil. See, the conjurer is supposed to be conjuring up the devil to give him power. And, it's not the devil, obviously, it's the servant coming through the trapdoor. There were hundreds of these guys operating in the 19th century. You might think that, you'd only find them in sort of far-flung villages where there are, just sort of unsophisticated people. But that's not the case. There were actually some in London. There were some in Leeds, in Sheffield, in Durham. And there were thousands of fortune tellers in this era, and they also did counter-witchcraft therapies. And I want to talk about those therapies now, because I think it's important when we're sort of judging the good and the bad in magic. Now, there are lots of ways that if you went to a guy like this, that they'd try and heal you, they'd try and help you. The first thing to do was to find out if you were bewitched. So you had to disclose all your problems, and you'll never guess, most people were bewitched. The next thing to do was to find out who was bewitching you. Because if you don't find the witch, if you don't identify the individual, they're more powerful, they're stronger, they can act secretly, they can get you behind your back. You need to know who it is, who to face, who to defend yourself from. Many methods to do that. For example, they just get a big bowl of water, sit you down there, look over the bowl of water, keep staring, look carefully. Have you seen faces? Not your own. Or you could make, like I showed you that heart where they stick the pins in. You make things like that were supposed to attack the witch. There are also things called witch bottles, which were sort of curved bottles, look a little bit like a bladder almost, and you put a bit of your nails in, a bit of your hair in, and then this is an important ingredient, a bit of your urine in. Bottle it up, boil it over the fire, and it was supposed to kind of make the witch give them a horrible pain and make them kind of come and beg for mercy, beg for you to sort of leave them alone. And these were the ways you were supposed to find the witch. And then you could devise various methods to defend the client or attack the witch back once you knew who it was. So there are all these different methods, conjuring up devils, using strange symbols, using magic books called grimoires. But the essence of this healing, this form of counter-magic, was faith. That's what cunning folk asked their clients, fortune tellers asked their clients above all. They said, you've got to have faith. You've got to believe, firstly, that you're bewitched. You've got to believe in my power to send the magic back. And that's not a very easy thing to believe. And that was the point. And this is where I think you can begin to imagine that sometimes for some people, the belief in witchcraft and magic could have value. For people who are experiencing a great array of troubles. Now here I want to draw your attention to an emergent area of scientific research, and it concerns the relationship between spirituality and mental health care. It's a very controversial area, as you'd imagine, because, science is a secular enterprise. But this has been studied now at some length since the 1990s, and basically the discovery is that, on the whole, people who have faith, people who have spirituality, seem to be less prone to depression, less prone to mental health problems. And I think that's relevant to what the cunning folk and the fortune tellers were doing when they were demanding that their clients had faith, and they were kind of teaching them how to have faith. And this is why, they needed, they went around in amazing clothes, and you needed the kind of the gift of the gab, and have skulls in your consulting room, and all sorts of herbs, and this kind of thing. It was all designed to kind of conjure up a faith, a kind of optimistic state of mind, a determined state of mind that helped people who were suffering from all sorts of problems, all the kind of coincidence of terrible misfortunes. And there were probably other ways that counter magic helped people who were really suffering. For example, cunning folk asked their clients to really be very explicit about all their problems. You might wonder, how on earth does he know that? How does he know what went on in one of these consulting rooms? Well, I know because some people tried to have counter magic done by post. If that sounds unlikely, you can have fortune telling done by Skype nowadays. You can pay by PayPal. And so we've got some of the letters that clients sent to cunning folk, and we know basically what they were expected to do. They described in really intricate and elaborate detail all their problems. They said, I've got a bad heart, the rent's due, I've fallen out with my sweetheart, I'm having problems at work, I can't get a job. And you can imagine that kind of thing would help people as well, because it's sort of similar to some forms of counselling almost, to cognitive behavioural therapy and whatnot, which I'm sure some of you will be familiar with, where you're supposed to be really forthright about all your problems, and they kind of it feels less oppressive, it feels less bad when you are able to spell it out and to be plain about these troubles. Okay, so I talked a bit about the possible sort of therapeutic side of believing in magic. I don't want to give you the impression at all, though, that I think witchcraft's all positive. I think, clearly it wasn't. Clearly there were lots of fraudulent people who charged ridiculous amounts of money. And witchcraft also led to much worse problems than that, and much more damaging events. Things like this. This is a picture starting to get illustrated papers in the sort of 1850s, 60s, 70s. Picture of a supposed witch being ducked, being kind of swum in the pond. You might think, what, that sort of stuff in the Victorian period? Well, yes. There were episodes like this. They were mostly from the early 1800s, actually. I'll describe one to you now. In Suffolk, there's a village called Wickham Skeeth. And in 1820s Wickham Skeeth, there was a little old man called Isaac Stebbings. And he went about door to door. He went about sort of selling wares, selling odds and sods. He was a hawker. And he was kind of a beggar, kind of a seller. And he developed a bit of a bad relationship with some of his neighbours. And like other people who develop bad relationships with their neighbours, he started to be blamed when things went wrong. People started to say he was a wizard. He was using evil magic. And poor old Isaac, he was sort of bullied and hectored and dismissed and besmirched. And it got to the point in 1825 when he proposed that to his fellow villagers, he said, you need to try me for a wizard. You need to test, you need to prove that I'm what you say. And he suggested, amazingly, that they swim him for a wizard. So they went down to the village pond, had a local name, it's called the Grimmer. All the village assembled there one Saturday. Isaac got there. He was in his white shirt, in his pantaloons, little old man. 4 men were there, chaperoning him into the water. Walked out into the water. They laid him up on his back, and this was the test. If he sank, he was just a normal bloke. But if he floated, it meant the waters were kind of rejecting this evil presence. And guess what? He floated. And he was bobbing there for sort of half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, horrible traumatic event. And in the end, he said, you've got to do it again, you've got to do it next week. But thankfully, the vicar and the sort of bigwigs in the local area got involved and stopped that happening. But these kind of events took place in the 19th century. So did these type of events. Attacks on witches. If you were really desperate, if you thought you were caught really tight in a spell, you could attack your witch in a ritualistic way. Here's how you were supposed to do it. You're supposed to grab hold of them, take a knife, take a pin, take a nail, and you're supposed to scratch them, draw their blood, particularly above the breath on the head. And that was supposed to break the power of the witch's spells. There are hundreds of these cases recorded in the 19th century. Sometimes people took it a bit far, way too far. Like in this case here, this is a representation of an actual event. In 1875 in South Warwickshire, there's a little village called Longcompton. Some of you might know it. Some of you might have been to the Rollright Stones in South Oxfordshire. It's a lovely stone circle. Well, it's near there. And it's a village that had a real reputation for witchcraft. People used to say there were enough witches lived in this village to drag a cart up the hill. And in 1875, there was an agricultural labourer living there who was struggling to get work, and he had some psychological problems. And this guy called James Hayward, he ended up blaming his neighbour, who he'd lived next to for decades, an old woman called Anne Tennant, for bewitching him. And he killed her. One day he was just completely sort of delirious with his sufferings. He was coming back down the road. He got his pitchfork and he stabbed her. And he killed her. So there's a real dark history, a scary and disturbing history to witchcraft in the modern period. And I think it's an important history when we look at how you can stop this kind of vigilante action, these sort of attacks against witches. Basically, what do you think stopped them? Do you think it was people getting better educated? People living more comfortable lives such that they weren't troubled by thoughts of witchcraft and sorcery anymore? Maybe it had a small role. Actually, though, the solution here was provided by the police. Britain didn't have a professional police force in the towns till about the 1830s. There was a big resistance to professional police force. It was expensive, it was seen as illiberal and oppressive. Instead, you just had pretty much just some local bloke who kind of went along with whatever the local people wanted to do. Someone from the community, in other words, and who wasn't a professional and wasn't really paid very much. And that started to change in the 1830s. The governing classes started to get really nervous about the prospects of revolution and the growth of towns. They thought, we need to make sure the population behaves itself. So police forces were rolled out, first in urban areas, then in the countryside from the 1850s. And it was this that stopped first mob attacks on witches, these swimmings and other horrid events where people had kind of got together in big groups and gone and scratched and roughed people up who were accused of doing evil magic. And then later in the 19th century, it stopped individual scratchings and attacks on witches. I should say, though, it didn't mean that people had stopped believing. In fact, people just came up with alternative ways of dealing with witchcraft. They'd start spitting in the witch's face, for example, horrid stuff like that, or throw some dirt in the alleged witch's face. So that's what really put a stop to vigilante attacks on witches in Britain. It was the police force. And in some ways, that's quite encouraging. I think it underlines how action from the state can actually deal with the most destructive and the most negative consequences of the belief in magic. But what about the belief in witchcraft itself? Well, that was really widespread throughout the 1800s, and then it started to diminish in the early 1900s. And again, this wasn't because people were becoming better educated or weren't thinking in this way because they were living more comfortable lives. People still, fell out with their loved ones, still had mysterious illnesses, still had problems. Instead, it was because of things like this. These are some late 19th century newspaper pictures, some drawings, and there were fortune tellers in trouble. They didn't predict that, right? There's the fortune teller, he's got his magic mirror, he's got his robe and with his symbols on and his skull and his book and that kind of thing. And the police have come round and they've come to arrest him. And it had always been a, legally dubious line of work, fortune telling. It was, strictly speaking, it was illegal. It was made illegal under an Act of Parliament in 1736. It was a very sort of severe Act of Parliament that, if you were found guilty, you were supposed to be, put in the pillory, put in the stocks and have people throwing fruit and rocks at you and that kind of thing. But no one really didn't get used that often. There was more legislation against it. In 1824, magistrates could fine people and send them away for a month or something. There wasn't really much serious attempt to stamp out the practice of professional magic, not until the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And the key development here was medical regulation. In the first half of the 20th century, the state was getting much bigger. The state was tiny by our standards in the Victorian era, so sort of 5% of annual national income. And it expanded really quickly into all sorts of areas of life in the early 1900s. And one of those areas was medicine. All sorts of acts, I won't bore you with the particular details, but all sorts of acts of Parliament were passed to prohibit people from acting as a midwife or selling medicines or setting themselves up as a nurse without joining official registers. Basically, the state started to really regulate spiritual healing, esoteric healthcare, just tried to sort of stamp out that kind of activity and just make sure that actually what was available was scientific medicine or biomedicine. And that's why people like these fortune tellers were starting to get in trouble. That's why they were starting to get more and more visits from the police, and they began to be put out of business, ultimately. Sounds, in some ways, you might think, this sounds like quite an encouraging story. The dark side of magic. We've got rid of it. We got rid of it with policing. We got rid of it with medical regulation. Well, the truth is, it's not the end of the story. I'm not taking commission for this guy, right? I'm not recommending that you use him. I should probably have blurred out that phone number. This is a card that one of my students was given in Camden in 2015, and he passed it on to me. It's a card for Mr. Salem, or Salim, from birth, a gifted African spiritual healer and advisor. I can help you solve all your problems regarding relationship, loved ones back, curses, unexplained illnesses, union or separation, black magic, and so on. Basically, in recent decades, we've seen a big increase in the number of esoteric healers, spiritual healers, and people who offer curse removal in Britain. It's happened largely since the 1970s. You can get people that will do this kind of thing representing pretty much every religious and magical tradition that you can imagine. Christianity, Islam, mediums, druids, white witches, all sorts. It's very diverse. It's legally dubious. Very hard to get statistics on this. There was one estimate that already by the 1990s, there were more people working in what they call the folk sector in Britain than there were general practitioners. It's part of a much wider process that academics give, for once, I think, quite a nice name, which is the re-enchantment of the world. It's the revival of intuitive and spiritual and magical ways of thinking. I want to take one of the more dramatic illustrations of this is the belief in ghosts. There was some opinion polling done in the 1950s, and it found, would you believe, proportion of respondents saying that they believed in ghosts in Britain, it was about 10%. Today, what do you think it is? Any ideas?
60.
Oh, okay, that's a bit too high, but not far off. It's about 45% of people today that say they believe in hauntings and ghosts. The belief in black magic and witchcraft, it's not increased in quite so dramatic and extreme way as that. In the 70s, people didn't even bother asking in the 50s, they assumed that no one believed in it. In the 70s, it was about 7 or 8% of people said they credited black magic. Today, it's about 15%. So there's been an increase in this belief, and I think it's something to do with changing atmosphere, more scope for freedom of conscience. And there's been kind of less attention really given to these characters like Mr. Salim, Mr. Salem. I don't suppose it's all bad. Like I was saying with some of the Victorian cunning folk, you could imagine if people aren't overcharging, it might help some people who are in a difficult situation, so long as they keep taking their medicines and keep doing normal things. I don't see the particular harm, for instance, with buying a £25 curse removal bath bomb. Really, you can get them. I don't think that's a problem, but I do think it's a problem when people like Mr. Salem start claiming 100% guaranteed to work. And when people start charging massive sums of money, I could give you lots of anecdotal cases. There was one from Leicester in 2005, I think it was, a poor lady who just started going for some, humble tarot reading. And, she's in a desperate state of mind. She ended up getting caught up with a fraudulent healer who conned her out of her whole life savings, out 56 grand or something, saying that if she didn't pay, that her family would be cursed and her husband would die. And it gets worse than that. With the revival of belief in witchcraft and magic, we've seen a revival in bullying, victimization, false accusations. This was a case from London earlier this year in Wimbledon Magistrates Court. These two guys on the left, it's a mother and an adult son. They decided that they'd been cursed. They had strange illnesses that wouldn't go away. And they blamed, she's been photoshopped in, I should say, this woman on the right who was their neighbour. And they're doing all sorts of horrible stuff. They were telling the woman's little girl that she was a witch. They were trying to send curses back. They were saying, death by fire, and all this sort of stuff. And worst of all, they were playing the God channel at top volume through the walls at early hours of the morning. But it's horrible stuff, and thankfully that went to court and they were found guilty of harassment. But it gets worse than that. Some of you will probably be familiar with the absolutely ghoulish phenomena of child spiritual abuse. That's where children are accused of being either witches or possessed of devils or jinns, such that evil powers come out of them. And then they're subjected to traumatic exorcisms, often exorcisms that, believed to work through the purifying power of pain, like beatings, rubbing chili in people's eyes. The Department for Education's only recently started collecting statistics on this, but last year their statistics is 2017 to 18, And in that year, just for England and Wales, there were 1,630 cases of child spiritual abuse recorded, which is 4.5 a day. Unfortunately, the true scale of the problem is probably wider than that, because some local authorities and police forces don't record these statistics. So the re-enchantment of the world since the 70s, it's got many positive aspects. People can find magic enchanting, they can find it inspiring, life-affirming. Magic can be used in many positive ways. But I think as people who are interested in witchcraft and magic, it's also incumbent on us to recognise that the re-enchantment of the world, it has a dark side, it has a dangerous side, and I think we need to start working out what we can do about it. We could, for instance, just to begin with, we could actually have systematic statistics on crime that's been inspired by these kind of spiritual beliefs. We could consider more heavily regulating or using the regulations on the books more seriously. People who make inflated claims about 100% success rate and what have you. We might even follow the example of some countries in Africa and India and prohibit calling someone a witch, especially, a child a witch. But as I say, I think it's important that we recognise, yes, magic has good sides, but there's a dark side to the re-enchantment of the world, and it's incumbent on us to, together, come up with a solution to this modern problem. Thank you. Let's put the product back up there. We're not unlocking the doors till you've all bought a copy, by the way.
The doors are open. But our fine friends at the Word Bookshop do have books at the back if you'd like them, and after the Q&A, I think Thomas will be more than happy to sign copies for you. So we're going to take a short comfort break. I'm really sorry there's not a bar. We've not been able to organise that, but bear with us. Give us a 10-minute breather. We'll have the Q&A, and there's plenty pubs we can spill into afterwards. 10-minute break. We'll put the lights up and the music back on. The books are available from the back. Thank you again to Thomas Waters.
Thanks, everyone. Much appreciated. Thanks for coming out.
And we shall reconvene in about 10-15 minutes for questions and comments. Thank you. Can we have the lights higher, please? Can we have more light, please? Fiat Lux. Just more light. Hello. Oh, hang on. I need to be further away from the microphone. There we go. Hello. Right. Thanks for coming. So, to remind you, we're going to do a very brief public service announcement about the London Fortean Society, and then there'll be questions, comments for our speaker. His book is still available at the back. Get it while it's hot, probably. And then there'll be book signings at the end. In the meantime, the London Fortean Society, we're doing all sorts of things. We've been advertising it here, including, our next gathering is on the 30th of October, the day before the scariest day in the calendar, and obviously we're talking about QAnon, the conspiracy theory, and how it relates to old fucking Garfield, the President of the United States. After that, we have an event called the Haunted Landscape happening on the 23rd of November, which is a day-long talk about witchcraft, folklore, and the like, which will be happening in this room. There we go. Look at that. There we go. It's not sold out then, no. But don't hesitate. Oh, that's because the wonderful venue that is hosting us has just changed their ticketing system. So it's gone from one ticketing system, which is now sold out, to another ticketing system, which has loads of tickets. So do please buy tickets for this wonderful talk, which include talks on werewolves and vampires of the British landscape, witches, familiars, dark fairies, and all manner of things. Again, see the London Fortean Society website for that. And then we will be having a talk on Fortean stories of London transport, followed by a celebration of, I don't know if you're of my age, where actually the World of the Unknown, All About Ghosts by Usborne is basically the most amazing thing that has ever happened to you in your life. Never mind your first listen to Sonic Youth, never mind your first acid trip, never mind your first, I'm not going to go there. This shaped my childhood. And we've got the author and the publisher on the 19th of November at a lovely pub in Borough called The Miller, and we'll be just celebrating it, and copies will be available. Here's your heads up, David at the back. So that, really. Now, questions and comments for our speaker, before I bring him back on. Just a question, please, that be soliciting information, and comments, let's keep them brief. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people with questions and comments, so keep them brief for everyone. What we particularly don't like is somebody giving a 10-minute talk and then asking, do you agree at the end? Because we've not booked you and nobody wants to hear from you. Well, they do, but keep it brief, man, because this is basically for everyone. So this is for everyone, no matter what your knowledge of the occult. You can ask a question now. We have a Tim, if you could wave at the back. You've got a microphone, and Dewi, if you could wave at the back. He's got a microphone. We will send them your way if you've got a question. Please welcome back with a round of applause, because man, this is the biggest audience he ever spoke to. Please welcome back Thomas Waters.
Thank you.
Tim, I can't really see the people upstairs, so you might need to help me out. So when I say upstairs, just pick someone who doesn't look too scary. Who has a question or comment for our speaker? Okay, gentleman over there in the black T-shirt.
Thanks. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for a really wonderful talk. That was illuminating and disturbing in all the best ways.
Thank you.
Sticking with the disturbing side of things, you mentioned obviously the recent spates of attacks, and I wondered, has there been any sort of correlation, or correlation at least, since the referendum? Have these attacks kind of increased? And has there been kind of a racial Brexit element to them, another excuse to attack people?
It's too early to tell. No, I don't think so. I've not seen any evidence of that. I mean, do try and avoid Brexit in this whole topic. It is ever so slightly relevant. There used to be a piece of legislation that kind of pertains to the practice of magic. The Fraudulent Mediums Act was brought in 1951, and that was replaced with some European Union Consumer Practices Directive, which is supposed to regulate much of this area. So I suppose, you know, that's the only thing I can really say that's relevant. You know, there's, depending on how it goes, there's a potential to reframe that or to give it a better name. No, I don't believe so. No, not since Brexit.
Thank you.
Okay, so you've got a question down there. Could we, this light here, is there any chance we could turn it down so I can see the balcony? Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. It's actually a similar question regarding the resurgence of magical beliefs. Is it more to do with the fact it's less of a revival, but more to do with we have an increasingly diverse population? You've got more people coming from communities where it isn't a resurgence because they've always had these beliefs and they've just taken them over to the UK?
I think it's both. If there is opinion polling done on people from minority communities. Not very much, but there are a couple of polls done on belief in the supernatural for Muslims I think there's one in Leicester and one in Glasgow, and indeed it's belief in witchcraft and Nazar, as the evil eye is called, and jinn is more widespread amongst those groups. And the opinion polling seems to find, you know, it's a very kind of amorphous and sort of vague category, but among people from minority ethnic backgrounds there is a higher prevalence of belief in black magic, but it's not just there. It seems to be within the sort of white British population as well. There's been a modest increase. One of the interesting things that I was struck by doing research on this is how people from white British backgrounds, when terrible things start happening to them, when they start looking, you start to get desperate, start to look for alternative remedies, the normal things haven't changed, that they will actually end up going to sometimes jinn removers or to African spiritual healers, and that you'd probably be surprised if you looked into it actually how people can just try a succession of spiritual healers, you know, a deliverance minister, then an African spiritual healer, then a jinn remover. So, to sum it up, I think it's both. I think there's been a resurgence in the sort of majority, and yes, you're right, that these beliefs are more prevalent amongst, people of South Asian heritage, for example, and African heritage. Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you very much.
Okay, there's a question up on the balcony.
Hi.
Hi.
So, as you have just said that, so your belief in what you've just said comes predominantly from a Muslim Southeast Asian community, yeah? From what you're saying. So can I ask firstly, when you ask, like, say the lady who just said that in terms of like the resurgence in certain beliefs, firstly, when do you believe, what sort of time period do you believe this happened in? Or like what sort of year?
Yes, I think it's been a steady increase from the 70s to the present day. And
then, so secondly then, so from the studies that have been performed, which you just referred to. Yeah. So you just said that they came from a predominantly Muslim Southeast Asian background, right? Those were two that I referred to. They're two specific opinion polling. It's quite small scale of people from people of Muslim in Muslim faith in Glasgow and in Leicester. There are also wider studies that use, as I say, the rather vague and not particularly useful category of people from minority ethnic backgrounds as well. So I referred to that. You'll find that amongst that very broad category, there registers a higher level of belief in sort of imminent supernatural powers, things like black magic. So then, basically, that's kind of nullified a lot of what you've just spoken about in this conversation in terms of modern-day society, in terms of representation of those within this society. I don't want to be that person, but I'm going to be that person right now looking around. I don't follow your reasoning, to tell you the truth. You've just given your representation for a lot of what you've just spoken of based off of studies just based off of like Muslim and African society, like Muslim and like Islamic societies. I've lived here for a lot of my life, all of my life, but I don't come from that background. So it's not representing this country from the 70s. or like from modern era in this country. So I just kind of want to see where you're coming from with this, because you dropped the card for Mr. Salim up on the board. I've grown up with Mr. Salim, but there's a whole other people, like whole other lots you didn't give, like the people that used to give out like gypsy flowers in like the car parks of supermarkets.
Hang on, can we
No, that's
can we
all right.
not be rude
You should ask your question. Am I right in? I don't entirely follow the sense of what you're saying. Do you think? Am I correct in? Do you think that I've overstated the prevalence of these beliefs amongst people from minority ethnic backgrounds? Is that what you're suggesting?
Can we let Tom answer the question, please?
Let's just have one person at a time. I didn't mean to mistake it. I didn't.
I just don't think like it just wasn't very clear, because you kind of went Victorian spiritualist.
Yeah.
Mr. Salim.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And then
let me.
A huge question.
Can I just deal with this single question, please?
Day.
Can Tom please answer that question?
It's because it gets a bit chaotic otherwise. Let me just deal with this very particular point. Belief in evil magic, in imminent magic, is found in all communities, in all sections of British society. That doesn't mean it's found to an equal extent, and it doesn't mean that people from some communities all believe this. I'm just going on the basis of the limited data we have, which is the opinion polling, and it's limited and crude, and I spoke about some of the limitations of that data. And what it suggests is that people from all ethnic groups and all cultural groups and all religious groups can, if things get bad enough, can start thinking in this way. But it's not necessarily an equal level of belief. You know, these ideas seem to be somewhat more current amongst some people from South Asian backgrounds, as I say, and others. I'm sorry, I didn't quite. In truth, I didn't really kind of grasp the thrust of the point that you were making.
I'll talk to you afterwards.
Okay, can we not be rude to other people, please? Otherwise, I can be really rude to you. Yeah. Okay? So, other hands up. Anyone else from the balcony who isn't an opinionated white man? Tim, look one of those out. Thank you. Who have you given the mic to?
Sorry. Hi.
Hi.
Sorry. Just maybe go back a couple of 100 years. I was quite interested. You were saying that the sort of solutions they had for witchcraft, but they were almost witchcraft in themselves. So at what point would they be considered witches, or was it okay if you were kind of trying to stop witchcraft?
You're right to draw attention to that lots of the cures people had when in the Victorian period, they believed they were bewitched, were very similar to what witches were accused of doing, which is trying to harm your enemy with evil magic. And actually, you sort of alluded to this, these misunderstandings did occur, that some people thought they were bewitched, so they thought they found their witch, and they tried to, attack them back magically. And then the person who they were attacking back magically decided that they'd been bewitched. So actually it was a very ambiguous and sort of chaotic area of interaction. And these misunderstandings did occur. Some people who thought they were bewitched and they were just acting innocently to repel witchcraft were indeed accused of being witches or wizards themselves. Yes, those mistakes definitely happened. Those misunderstandings.
Okay, we're going to give the next microphone goes to another opinionated white man. Who could one of those put their hands up, please? You're not an opinionated white man. Okay, that gentleman there in the black jumper. We'll get to you in a minute, sir.
Do you think there's a problem in the psychiatric profession in that anyone who comes to them and mentions things like witchcraft and that they're having problems are sort of in their mindset that this is a delusion, that, and then they go through the categories of psychosis, schizophrenia and things, and that this belief system you've been talking about this evening is not really respected by our modern psychiatric profession, who therefore are unable to really help a lot of these people?
Yes, I think if people take that dismissive attitude, if they don't listen carefully to the understanding that their clients have and their sort of worldview and their cosmology, then it is problematic, and you have these sort of very crude lumping of various magical and spiritual beliefs into medical categories. But I would say, not entirely, but to slightly challenge the premise of your question, there's a very small movement within psychiatry and psychology that has been attempting to combine, sort of more orthodox psychology and psychiatry with spiritual healing. I've forgotten the full name of it. There was an interfaith centre set up in London in the 1980s that is supposed to, I think I'm writing about it in my book, that was supposed to deal with both of these things. It's supposed to bring together orthodox psychologists, counsellors and psychiatrists with spiritual healers, and so that people could experience both, in other words. And there are a few articles that began to appear in the British Medical Journal in the 1990s that advocated that kind of approach. So actually there's, I think, it's still very small, it's still very fringe, but within the orthodox medical profession, there's been a kind of an openness and an opening up to combining spiritual healing with what you might call scientific medicine, biomedicine, and that it's still quite a small development, but that's beginning to happen, and I think it's something. Well, I would say it's something that's worth exploring, because the people that have participated in that kind of psychiatry and psychology seem to have found that it can work. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, who else has a hand up? I'm not totally discriminating, just want to make sure everyone gets a voice. Okay, we've got a question down here, and Tim, we've got a question there in the white top, which after this person's asked their question.
Excuse my voice.
No, that's all right.
I'm a teacher, and I was really interested in what you said at the end about the 1,000-odd children who are now being persecuted by being told that they're witches. In education at the moment, there's a huge amount on safeguarding children. Yep. We have training on safeguarding children regularly. Ofsted come in, talk to us about training. We know about FGM, we know about all sorts of things, but not once has anybody ever mentioned witchcraft or that sort of spiritual type of thing as could cause a problem in schools. And I just wondered if you thought of any reason why that could be, because if it is getting as prevalent as you say, and you said 4.5 children.
4.5 cases a day if you use the last year's worth of figures, which was 2017 to 18, yeah.
So why, as professionals, are we not being told about that?
Yeah, I think your experience is quite a common one amongst professionals with responsibilities for safeguarding. I was looking at, an article in some obscure academic journal recently, which was polling people about, teachers and other social workers and others about their knowledge about child spiritual abuse. And yeah, the thing that came back overwhelmingly was that the professionals wanted more knowledge, wanted to know more about this. The reason that there isn't more knowledge about there is because this is, frankly, it's a very eerie and a very secretive subject, and it's quite an obscure subject. It's something that people don't like to talk about. Some people think, especially the people that take it most seriously, if you talk about it, maybe bad things will happen. Speak of the devil and he'll appear, and that kind of thing. And so that's part of a reason. It's very hidden, it's very underground, it's legally dubious as well as kind of being eerie, and it's not something people like to advertise or talk about. And it's also quite kind of complex, it's quite intricate. So all those things come together to obscure it, to hide this area of life, this area of thought and belief. And I think that's the reason. Ultimately, I think what you're intimating is that we ought to have more education for people with safeguarding responsibilities like yourself, in the field of child spiritual abuse and radical spiritualities. And I quite agree. I think it would go a long way. And I think there's a lot of scope for government and to work with police and teachers and so on to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to say. Oh, hey, hello.
However, a belief in witchcraft is not inherently a safeguarding issue here.
But apparently there's 4.5 cases a day, and so therefore shouldn't we need to know about that?
It depends on your belief system.
Yes, I'll address that point about whether it's all destructive. Now, I tried to go to some trouble in the lecture to explain how this belief system doesn't always have to be negative, how it can be positive. For example, I would say, there are people who do curse removal ceremonies, but they are very careful not to accuse anyone of laying the curse. Now,
I think you got to.
No, it's not. No, it isn't. Come on. If you read that carefully and sincerely, it isn't.
Okay, person up there whose name I don't know. Hey. Okay, so I think you're available. You're available for discussion, aren't you?
Of course. Yeah.
This is a Q&A, and I appreciate that you've got things you want to discuss, but this is not the place to have an argument with someone. And I really appreciate what you're trying to say, but this is not the place to have an argument.
Should we talk about it after, maybe?
Yeah, you can discuss it afterwards. And honestly, I'm not devaluing what you've got to say, but this is an open forum for everyone.
One question, apart from what she said, so on this whole child and safeguarding issue, so I was involved very heavily on the Victorian case in terms of forensic digging and everything, and that was very much a suggestion that was made by those of us that did the research on this case, in as much as we needed to look at more than just what are the traditional things that we're looking at in terms of child abuse. We did, as a panel, make a recommendation that child witchcraft and other things should be looked at by social workers and those when we put our findings forward for what happened with the Victorian case, which is one of the very first cases with child witchcraft. I was there, I did it, I was in that case for 4 years. But I'm just saying, we don't get told about it.
Okay, again, guys, honestly,
stripping off here.
I mean the London Fortean Society here, if we want to discuss representations of witchcraft and our society, I'm more than happy to do that and do it for free, because I appreciate it's an important thing to our society. This is the second talk we've hosted this year about contemporary witchcraft and the harm or otherwise it does. So do please see us after, or you can find us London Fortean Society wherever, and we can hold a discussion about it. We'll do it for free because it's important. Okay? Sorry, are you you're not whispering, are you?
Yeah, we're whispering.
Okay, fine. Well, we're going to go. There's a man at the back there with his arm, with a really sore arm, so we're going to go to him next.
Quick question. Nothing. It's a quick question about Long Compton.
Yeah.
Did you know? I'm sure you do, but I can't find it in the book. About there was the last murder. There was a murder there in 1959, which was unsolved. Did you know about that?
No, I didn't. No, it's not something that's in the book, as you say. I don't know if you think that this murder, had a spiritual or witchy dimension. I mentioned the murder at Lower Quinton in Warwickshire, which is quite a famous
1959, a worker was found dead in...
Are you reading now?
What did he say?
All right, I'll look into it.
Okay, I've got to. This is the most fun Q&A of my life.
Yeah.
Who's got the next question? Oh yeah, white top. Okay, come on, let's get back to sanity.
Thomas, hi, thank you. This is a bit more on a lighter note. You mentioned the Royal White Stones and a village that was associated with the stones. Well, my friend and myself, my friend, we actually visited the stones about 5 years ago, and on inspection, it was in the springtime. I actually found there's like a sort of an altar in one of the stones. We found a corn doll in this like sort of offering. And it had a sort of scroll made out of sort of corn, sort of the corn husks and stuff. But anyway, when we were driving back, I sort of said, "Oh, look what I've brought with me," and like my friends were like, "Throw it out the window," because
this is total MRJ shit right now.
Sorry. When we opened the scroll, it had some kind of runic writing on it, but we never actually, we couldn't decipher it or anything.
Okay,
but what I wanted to know, my question was,
for an event if you're going to come up with this.
All I wanted to say was, that you were talking about forms of, beliefs being associated with other countries, people, but that was obviously some kind of English tradition there, very so. And as you actually mentioned that it was the local village had some kind of witchy sort of connotation or connection with the stone circle. And as I said, we found that corn doll. It was about 5 years ago, so it's obviously still some kind of there's still obviously things going on there, but would you consider that a good or a bad thing?
Do I have to to limit my answer to good or bad?
We're not asking for a recap. Look, you're gonna have to work
right.
What you got.
No, I know what you're getting at. Some people had gone up to the Rollite stones and they kind of used it ritually. What you find nowadays with stone circles, these ancient monuments, is that people use them in all sorts of new ways. When you said it's a tradition, it might be a tradition, but it might be a recently invented tradition or a very eccentric and minority tradition. People use these monuments in all sorts of different ways. That's a kind of a new idea, basically, that's been brought about by someone. I can't comment exactly, obviously, on what people were aiming to achieve with the corn doll there, but a lot of neo-pagans and others are attracted to these stone circles, and they use them in all sorts of different and new ways, and that's probably an example of that, rather than a sort of ancient tradition that's continued unchanged for thousands of years.
Right, hey, let's have a question. You there, with your arm really high up.
Thanks. Has any of your research covered witchcraft as a vehicle of violence or aggression against women? And if so, what did you find?
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't really dwell on that theme more, because it is an important theme that needs to be stressed. In the period that I study, since the 1800s, about 90% of the people who were accused of witchcraft were women. And it's quite an amazing continuity, that, because in the period of the witch trials, in roughly the late 1400s to the early 1700s in Britain, around 90% of the people that were accused of witchcraft were women. So it's a very kind of enduring stereotype in this country that, witches would be predominantly, but not only, women. Actually, that isn't universal. In most societies and in most cultures, indeed, women make up the majority, but there are exceptions. In Iceland, for example, in the period of the witch trials, witches were mostly men, and in Normandy, in France, from the period of the witch trials right up to the 20th century, most witches were men. So yes, it is something it is a kind of accusation that's attached itself principally to women, but it's a bit more complicated than it just being a way to stigmatize women, just a way to sort of attack women for being women. And the reason I say that is that all sorts of strange things happened. The people that accused others of being witches, many of them were also women. In fact, in the period I studied, it's about 50-50 men and women. And would you believe quite a significant number of the people who were making accusations were the relatives of the accused. They were the sisters, the aunts, the daughters, the granddaughters. It sounds unlikely, doesn't it? But I'm afraid this is a sad case, just a minority of cases, but something like 10% were related in that way. Ultimately, I find this one of the most mysterious and difficult to explain features of witchcraft belief. There's no doubt that the accusations do attach to women. I wish I could tell you exactly why. I think it's the strange survival of stereotypes from the period of the witch trials. Quite where these stereotypes originated, I can't tell you, but somehow these stereotypes persisted. And when people looked around, first you decide you're bewitched, and then you look around for somebody who's a plausible culprit. In this country, it sadly often was focused on women, and it wasn't just sort of levied by men against women, it was also women thought the same.
Okay, there was a question right down here at the front, and then balcony people who can't see so well, give me a wave. Anyone?
I wear my pentagram with pride. I am a witch. What? Most of the community say that if you have to put a colour against the word witch, you don't understand witchcraft. And I am particularly bothered about using the word witch for the malpractice in schools against school children today, that we are going to drive the indigenous witchcraft practices underground again, because we're going to be asking our already overworked teachers to distinguish between the malicious abuse of children that is done in the name of witchcraft but is not witchcraft. We're going to ask the teachers to be able to distinguish between that and genuine pagan practice of today. And little Joey will say, "Oh, I went out with the witches at the weekend and it was really good fun, but I got really scared." Now, I can see a problem in time with that. What can the academics and the writers of today do to present people like myself in the true light and not tar them with that brush?
It's a good question. I mean, the truth is that the word witch and the word witchcraft has got many meanings and connotations, very many, and you've drawn attention to a very important distinction, an absolutely vital distinction between neo-pagan witchcraft and other witchcrafts as a spirituality, and witchcraft in terms of the dark side of magic, or the malicious side of magic. Ultimately, I think we've got to delineate the very wide range of beliefs and ideas that exist within our community and exist within the world about magic. We've got to educate people about the different language and different terminology that people use, as well as what we use. Other people don't necessarily use the terminology that we want them to do. So I think it's just incumbent on us to really understand in a subtle way the varieties of belief in magic, spirituality, and the supernatural, and to distinguish very strongly between neo-pagan witchcraft and the idea that witchcraft can be a malevolent power. So ultimately, I think we need to write and talk and speak about these topics much more and in much greater depth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate as Thomas said, that witch is a multifaceted word, and unfortunately that can mean all loads of different things. And it's kind of hit me the responsibility of putting this talk on tonight about the idea of witchcraft and how it can be interpreted and misinterpreted. So I think we should definitely do some kind of workshop or talk or event about that, because this is the second talk we've done this year about people being harmed by people who are regarded as witches, but it's so much more complicated than that. So we've got time for 2 or 3 more questions. Let's hear it from the crazy balcony. Who's got a question upstairs? Tim, can you see anyone? Not you.
No.
You've got your own event, all right? Don't worry about that. You got one. Thank you, Tim.
Did you call Mr. Salem?
Bro. Dude. What's going on? Hello?
Is the mic not working?
It's working.
Mate, what's going on?
Did you ever phone Mr. Salem?
Could you start that from the beginning?
Did you call Mr. Salem? Did I call him? Right, no, okay, yeah. No. No.
Thank you, Professor.
I suppose to be candid about it, as well as sort of studying the historical material and documents, I've tried to experience some degree of magic and mysticism for myself, to have a perspective on it. I've had my fortune told. I've done a bit of crystal healing. I've taken part in shamanic drumming on a Saturday morning, which I can recommend. I've never had a curse removed, though, so I didn't call Mr. Salem, and I've never done anything as drastic as that. But I have, some limited experience of mystical and magical therapies.
Okay, I heard a mention of Mr. Salem earlier. Has anyone here actually called Mr. Salem? Mm-hmm. You got your hand up, but is that a question, or is that like, yay, we've called Mr. Salem? Okay, quick, you two, let's get a question to you. We've got nothing to say about Mr. Salem. I'm sure he's a lovely guy. We know nothing about him, because I appreciate this is being live streamed.
Someone's actually interviewed that person from the card, and they made a little animation of it on YouTube.
Ooh.
So type in Mr. Medela, the spiritual healer, the interview would come up, so you can see that.
Could you say that again, please? I didn't catch it.
Mr. Medela, the spiritual healer. If you type that on YouTube, the interview would come up.
Wait, you're here for free.
Madila.
Okay, thank you for that. Would you, as in my capacity as someone who's a bit of a stressed out MC at the moment, could you email that to the London Fortean Society in some way? I'd really appreciate it. I'd really love to see that. Thank you. Right, okay, downstairs.
Yeah.
Big hand there, big hand there. I can't see who's attached to it, but... No, there. Then, who was waving down here?
There was a book written by a French author that was released this year called Sorcières, or Witches, in France, and it made a lot of noise. It was about witch hunt and witchcraft today. And one of her theories about the fact that most witches, or most accused women of being witches, most people accused of being witches were women. And the theory was just women back in the days were healers, and they were perceived most often as actually people who know what they were doing. And so when the whole witch hunt started, men and doctors took that opportunity to basically get rid of competition, because people would rarely go to a man, and women were perceived as more competent when it comes to healing people. So is it something that you would support as a theory?
I don't think that theory is true. It's a very common theory, but I don't think it's true. It sounds plausible, doesn't it, that it'd just be an excuse to kind of clamp down on rivals. But, I can tell you from the specific period that I study that the people accused of witchcraft, they were just normal people. They were just people that unfortunately ended up falling out or having a slightly fractious relationship with other people who ended up having so much going on in their lives that they concluded they were cursed or bewitched and started looking out for people who were victims. So no, I mean, it's a plausible theory, but I don't think it's borne out, actually. If you look closely at the data of the women that are accused of witchcraft, they're not, it's not for that reason. They are genuinely believed to be, wrongly, but they're believed to be witches and dealing in the dark arts. But thank you.
Okay, quick hands up. We've got 2 more questions before we can go to the pub. Okay, yeah, everyone's really keen for that man there to ask a question.
Hello, hi. I'm afraid it's actually pretty boring because it's about statistics.
That's really embarrassing.
No, actually, it's more. Well, thank you for the talk, first of all.
My pleasure.
I wanted to know if you have any data or any opinion on the relationship between the re-enchantment of the world and the newest generations, and especially the relationship they have with technology and the internet.
So can you say that again? The relationship between the re-enchantment of the world and technology?
Yeah,
so
is there any specific data on the relationship between the newest generation, the youngest generations, the use of technology and the re-enchantment of the world?
There isn't, in terms of, sort of related statistics and linear regression analysis and that sort of thing. No, there isn't. There aren't solid statistics in that way. There's a kind of suggestive evidence, though, that various supernatural beliefs and radical spiritualities are spread through the relatively free and unregulated medium of the internet. And one example of that is something known as spiritual warfare. Spiritual warfare is a very radical version of Christianity that perceives demons and hostile malevolent forces as being everywhere, all around you. And if you happen to wear the wrong clothes or listen to the wrong music or have the wrong statue in your house, then a demon will go into you and get you. Basically, these ideas, they're written about in books and people preach them in the States, but they've been spread on internet forums. So there's clearly some extent to which magic's conveyed and new magical and spiritual ideas are conveyed around the world through the internet. The second thing I've mentioned is that people can sell, like I said, curse removal incense or curse removal bath bombs on eBay and Etsy and that kind of thing. Those platforms did actually prohibit back in the early 2010s the selling of these metaphysical items because basically people started to complain. They started to say, it didn't work. And it's quite hard to action a complaint like that, quite hard to establish. So the internet is a vehicle for the selling of magical services and the spread of magical ideas. But statistically, in terms of sort of very sort of well-established statistical relationship, no, I don't have an evidence of that, just a sort of impressionistic evidence, really.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so time for one more from the balcony, because we love hearing from the balcony. Anyone got their hand up at the balcony? No? No? Okay, quick. Anyway, someone. So, okay, there you go. You got the last question.
Oh, thank you.
My pleasure.
As someone who's also quite involved in the witchcraft community, I know there's a lot of debate right now around the ethics around hexing, and some people believe you shouldn't do it. Some people believe, oh, well, there's some cases where you can. But of course, I think you've probably seen in the news, there's been cases of mass hexing of certain political figures. And
they got it coming.
So that being said, do you personally believe that there's an ethical way of using so-called black magic or practicing it?
Yeah.
Just for Conway Hall, which is the home of ethical thought.
Yeah.
Thank you for a question about the ethics of hexing. I really appreciate that.
I don't think there's a lot of harm done by hexing Donald Trump. Really, I mean, it inspires people. It's something for people to kind of coalesce around. It's something people find enlivening. Like I said, right, my line on magic is that there's good aspects of it that we should recognize and we should be truthful about, that helps people and inspires people. And there are bad aspects of it that are to do with kind of bullying and abuse and fraud and so on. And I don't, there's a limited number of cases where, if it's hexing to do with politics and it's not really upsetting someone, then I don't see the problem. It's only when it turns into, like really victimizing and, troubling someone that there's a problem. Yeah.
Thank you.
And on that point, I'd like to thank you very much all for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
All of your questions have been great, and I really appreciate it. But we're running a conventional Q&A here. We'll do a witchcraft bum fight another day.
Could I make a quick announcement, Scott? Witchcraft related, because it's the open ritual tomorrow here at the Pagan Federation. So if people are interested.
Tomorrow, yeah, Pagan Federation. If you want to see some pagans in action here tomorrow. Come along. Thank you, Dewi. That was Dewi, one of our helpers. Yeah, so come along for that. Thank you, Thomas Waters.
Thanks, everyone.
So, if you bought one of Tom's books. I don't know. I'm not a member. I'm really. Talk to that man waving down there. Tom will be signing books down there. Please don't have a go at him.
Down?
Yeah, go. You've got a pen.
Yeah.
Cool. It's at the back on that side. There's a guy with long grey hair there. And now it's freeform. Back to our lives. Thank you very much. Some of us will be in the pub drinking heavily after this. Thank you. Thank you.